Welcome to the stream. My name is Zealand. I'm wearing my analytical glasses today because we are about to lock in and analyze the latest drop of information about Football Manager 2026. Miles Jacobson did another interview, is what I'm reading. So we got a good amount of stuff in the Football Manager universe we need to go analyze real quick. I'm going to let this play all the way through, and then we are going to nitpick it and react to it, okay?
It's been a long time coming. The support, the passion, the rise and rise of the sport. And now it is finally part of Football Manager. This year, women's football has been introduced for the very first time in series history, changing the game forever. A new dimension, fully integrated and ready for you to discover however you want to play.
I would hope so.
With 14 leagues, across 11 nations and 3 continents, including some of the biggest licenses in the women's game. And it's all powered by the largest women's football database in games. It's still the Football Manager you know, built on depth, authenticity and realism. But now the women's game sits within that same universe. One world, one ecosystem, one database. Your story begins here in a new dimension of the beautiful game. Select men's football, women's football, or both, all existing together in one connected world, seamlessly integrated into the game you know and love, but with its own identity, shaped by how women truly play the sport at the highest level. That means a different transfer market, shorter deals, fewer release clauses, a system modelled on the realities of the
Hope you are doing
game.
well.
That's reflected with injuries too, based on real-world player data. A 20 is still a 20. For example, a striker in the women's game with a 20 for finishing is rated on the same scale as a men's striker, just measured within their own competitive context. But accuracy takes more than just data. Dedicated motion capture sessions with real footballers to understand the characteristics of how women move on the pitch, from pressing to passing, from shooting to celebrating. The results? More accurate movement, more realistic moments, a game that feels authentic on and off the pitch. This has been years in the making, built from the ground up, a promise made in 2021, delivered in FM26. And this is just the start. The database will expand, the experience will deepen, the game will keep evolving. In FM26, women's football is yours to define. Step into the dugout, it's time to change the game.
All right. Initial thoughts, chat. I have one huge takeaway from this. I want to see if anybody else kind of picked up on it. This is not just new. The database size was a surprise. That's huge. Literally the first time. Okay, Roydy, you just completely, I don't know if English is not your first language, but Roydy on YouTube, you completely misunderstood what they said about men's and women's finishing.
It is done the right way.
But the takeaway I had is this is a new match engine. They've re-mocapped all the stuff. They have re-motion captured all the stuff. And so if you play women's football in Football Manager, it is going, it is not just going to be the graphics, but the animations themselves are going to feel different. What did Brady say about finishing? So what they said was that men's finishing at 20 and women's finishing at 20 is not the same thing. That's not what they said. It was kind of a clumsy way to say it, but they said it's a 20 in their own competitive context, which obviously means there is a difference there. The matches that you play with the women's game are going to look and feel really different than the matches you play in the men's game. And that is a result of the fact that they have gone in motion cap. They probably, the reason it took them so long to get it into the game is they've gone and motion captured all of this stuff. My biggest takeaway was that. And then obviously they showed a lot of the match engine running. I mean, the graphics are still diabolical. Like, can we get a shot of, obviously the graphics are way better than they were. But this is, I don't know if it's just more apparent on women, right? But they're all just standing here like, Does that mean that a 20 finishing woman will be be a world beater in the men's game? No, this is not FIFA. You are not ever going to end up in a situation where women and men are on the same pitch in Football Manager, because that does not happen in a competitive context in real life either. All they meant to say is that a 20... FM26 delayed because Zealand complained about postures, bro. Now, the other thing I nearly paused on was this. Because have we seen this screen before? This is like the league selection screen at the start of the game. And holy W, dude. Holy monster W. Because, not the pizza slices. This is apparently league reputation, which, whatever. This is gorgeous. I mean, think about what it looks like now. I mean, I'm assuming this is without mods. Yeah, they're definitely still in like the alpha version of the game with this stuff. No conference leagues? It just means they're not selected. I'm sure the North and South and National League are in the game. If they remove those, there would be riots in the streets. No, it's like, this is gorgeous. One of the biggest single page improvements I have seen in the stuff that we have gone through so far. Because starting the game is one of the biggest hurdles to get over when starting Football Manager. Think about how ridiculously, this is team selection, not league selection. Okay, well, it's still better. Thank you. It's still better, but I hope now, since they're capable of doing this, I hope the game starting database selection looks kind of like this. I hope the game database selection at the start of the game looks like this. Because that would be a massive visual improvement. This is still an improvement on the team selection screen. This is really solid, my passion is graphic design thing right here. No national teams? I am going to be very honest with you. They obviously said they were removing national teams for FM25. Unless I'm mistaken, they haven't said anything about it since. If there are not national teams in FM26, you will get the saltiest YouTube video you have ever gotten from me. It is a World Cup year. You are adding women to the game for the first time. The biggest part of the women's game by magnitudes is the international game. The first thing I said when you were like, oh, women are going to be added to the game. Are you going to manage any women's teams? I was like, yes, I want to manage the women's national team of the U.S. That's the women's football I watch, is the women's national team of the U.S. FM27 canceled immediately. I freaking hope not. But look, if you can't get international management into a soccer game, into a football game, when the World Cup is happening that year, give up. That's like requirement A1. That's it. I mean, it's the biggest sporting event in the history of humanity. Every single time it comes around, it has more viewers, more human beings paying attention to it than literally anything else. And then you have the women's side, where the internet, like, that's just the cherry on top of the sundae there, which the biggest part of the women's game is the international side by much bigger magnitudes than on the men's. Like, you need to have international management in this game. It just has to be there. It has to be there. They added as a paid DLC. Outside of the editor, Football Manager is not really a paid DLC company, which is great. If they change that, it will be very annoying. If they change that, it would be incredibly annoying. The team selection screen here is nice. This is another team selection screen. So we've got, I mean, this is how it works, but this is how, like, they kind of said that it was going to work, where the women's and men's leagues will run in tandem, and coaches will move freely between the two. It opens up fun new possibilities, obviously, and confirms that, or reconfirms that. If you start unemployed, you can coach the U.S. women's national team, freaking hopefully, while also managing like Barcelona Femenina or whatever, right? You can coach in the women's second tier in Sweden and then parlay that into a job in the men's second tier. Like, I don't know necessarily how it's going to work. I would assume it would be based off reputation. And obviously the reputation of the women's leagues is going to be lower. But, you know, if you're managing in like the women's first tier and doing a good job, you could totally jump to like League One or something, right? It would be you'll be able to move fluidly in a journeyman between the men's and women's game. And I mean, the database, they said the database is like 41,000 players. It's insane that they've got 41,000 players in this database, right? That's more women in this game than FIFA's like ever gotten anywhere near in their total game, right? That's more there. Simba, though, thank you. Is international management fully gone? They just said it wasn't going to be an FM25. As far as I'm aware, unless you guys know differently, right? Like, as far as I'm aware, they haven't said anything about FM in this, in this cycle, basically. FIFA has like 4 leagues and 20 national. Yeah. Football Manager does dominate in one area, which is the number of footballers they put in the game. There were 480,000 men in the game this year, and now they're adding 41, nearly 42,000 women footballers into the game. Like, that's pretty great. I mean, it's like everybody that kicks a ball at a mildly professional level. Now, let's really soak in a couple of these match engine videos. I like that goalkeeper animation. And honestly, I feel like they have tried to fairly, like this, as somebody that has watched the U.S. women's national team my entire life, these sorts of goals or whatever, it feels more like women's football. I won't pretend to be an expert. I'm going to need more people to chime in on that. But it does feel like you're watching a 2007 microwave toaster version of women's football, right? And this type of goal, this was the highlight I was looking for. Where this, like, the goalkeeper's height and athleticism affects their ability to get to a shot like this. And you see goals like that happen in women's football where they don't happen in men's football. And that is something that you want to be in the game that is accurately simulating women's football. I kind of like these animations more than the men's trailer. I think that's another thing that's going to be really fun about playing, like, because they're slower and the keepers are worse. Yeah, that's true, Nate. Here's the fun thing. Here's the fun thing about saying that, right? Because that is a fact for a myriad of reasons, for a ton of reasons, right? Like, yes, if you put Thibaut Courtois and the best women's keeper up against each other, Thibaut Courtois is going to be better. The issue comes in when your entire personality or when your, like, entire being tells you that you need to, like, shout that constantly. That's when the issue comes in, right? Because logically, you are right. But there's a certain point where you cross a line where you're just kind of putting women down by being like, well, yeah, they're not as good as Thibaut Courtois. It's like, neither are you. So, right, the women's games existed for like 100 less years, right? And there are physical differences as well. No, it's not like that, just meaning why it looks different. I mean, that's, yeah, like, there are ways to say that are less inflammatory and, like, Andrew Tate adjacent, I don't like women because they scare me vibe. You know what I mean? And that always, like, I'm not going to kick off on about it too much because, like, I'm sure everybody here is cool. I think some people are pretty performative with their response to this. Like, where people, like, brace themselves for that one, like, mouth breathing, drooling on their knuckles person that comes flying in, like, there shouldn't be women in the game, you know? And so they come out and they're like, I can't believe that one person exists. And it's like, that one person has always existed. And the only reason they continue to exist is because you give them so much oxygen by reacting to them. But it's nice to have, like, a productive conversation about this stuff, too. Okay, I kind of thought there was more match engine footage there, but this was a stretch of her just talking. So is there anything on this page that we can glean? Because I feel like we've seen this before. We already went through, like, the whole UI changes and all the different pages. It's just the question of, is there anything different on the women's attribute screen? And I don't know if there'd be a reason for there to be anything different. Like, Rajdi on YouTube, you're kind of proving my point because you've talked about how the finishing in men's and women's game, like, if they're both 20, they're not at the same level. You are proving my point fully. Did I talk about the stadium? Are these stadiums new? I mean, I guess it looks new. I've never really seen anything like this before. That's a nice dribble move. This is a nice animation. Whoop! Skirt! Shelf. Easy. Buckets. Is there international women's ball? If there's not, I'm rioting. I'm dead serious. If there is not, I am rioting. Still not loving the improved graphics. I'm not going to lie, they look worse in this video. Like, the graphics look worse in this video than they did in some of the other ones they had. I mean, look, at the end of this highlight, she's just floating on the grass, bro. She's doing like 360s on ice at the end of that. Look, women in the game is a huge W. Like, having the women's leagues in the game, a ton of people watch women's football. The Women's World Cup, the most watched soccer match in the United States is a women's match ever. Dude, I'm gonna be honest. You're telling me these are new stadiums, I'm going to believe you. If you're telling me these are new stadiums, I'm just going to believe you. I just don't really pay attention to this because they're not like the real stadiums, you know? They're not like the real stadiums. All right, this is the article. It's got the interview. Let's get into it because I want to hear what else he has to say about this. This is from The Athletic, written by Art DeRoche, who sounds like a 16th century philosopher, and I dig that. What sparked the inclusion of women into the game? Miles Jacobson, the studio director, had a fairly personal push towards including women's football in the game. We'll turn the music off. Speaking at a showcase for the inclusion of women's teams in Football Manager, he recalled two stories when he was asked why they weren't already a part of the game. The first time the question came from his niece over Christmas dinner. That didn't surprise me at all. A lot of the directions that Miles seems to want to take the game usually come from personal experience, including him deciding that the game was not going to be released in FM25. So the second was when he was a guest speaking on a panel. On both occasions, he responded by saying a venture like that wasn't commercially viable. His niece didn't see that as an acceptable answer over the turkey, Brussels sprouts, and stuffing. Loving the visual aids here. Neither did several players in the England's women's side when Jacobson was finished with his panel appearance. Can I read? No. The message that Football Manager had to be part of the solution and not the problem was put to him, which was key to Sports Interactive's decision to include women in the game. What research went into this? Honestly, the research is probably the most impressive part because they now have 42,000 people in the game. Honest question, can you see a man playing the women's side of Football Manager? Absolutely, dude. For all different reasons. There are some guys that are genuinely super into the women's side of the game, whether that's because they live right next to one of the stadiums or they coached in it for a long time, down to they have a daughter playing, right? Like, there's so many different reasons that you'd be into it, right, or have been drawn to it. For me, it is the U.S. women's national team that brings me into the world of women's football every time, right? That is what just totally brings me in, and I am on my couch rooting as hard as I root for any team. Then you also have there's a ton of people that play Football Manager for the challenge. There's people that play Football Manager even if they don't watch the actual sport, right? And if you are playing Football Manager in a lot of different ways, like if you're playing a journeyman, if you're playing a kind of a challenge-based thing, if you're playing, think about this. Like, I might be the first person to maybe crack this open. You know the Pentagon Challenge? Now you got to add to it because you got to win the Champions League in the women's side of the game. So yes, I do think that there's going to be a lot of guys that have played Football Manager before that will also play in the women's side of the game. And I don't think that needs to be some huge line in the sand that people are crossing. It's just a part of the game. It's the same as like, oh, have you ever managed in South America? And some people are going to be like, yes. And some people are going to be like, no. And there's nothing wrong with either answer. Tina Keach is apparently the head of women's football research, led the efforts in building a database from scratch. Oh, dude, I didn't even think about that. The records starting in 2001. The first female entry at the time was current U.S. women's national team and former Chelsea women's manager Emma Hayes. Nice. They kept a record of who the first entry was. I mean, they said over 36,000 players. Now it's over 41. I gradually got to know the database, speaking to anyone that could help. I spent 8 months creating players, teams, and leagues. I looked at attributes and how we're going to make them work. Do we want them to be like the men or not? There are loads of questions, but it was about patience and reaching out to the right people. Without those various individuals, it wouldn't be possible to get where we are today. I didn't think about the fact that they built the database backwards. You can't just build it now. I would love it too if your manager can have a daughter. I would imagine that would be in the game. I hope I can develop a women's team by asking the board. Ooh. If you are like on a men's team and you're able to go to the board to ask for them to set up a women's team, that would be pretty cool. I don't know, like, other than it just being pretty cool, I don't know what other purpose it would serve in the game. because you won't be able to manage a men's and a women's team. They won't let you do that because you can't manage multiple club teams, and they're going to be treated as 2 club teams. But that would still just be neat to have. How realistic will it be? Okay, how are women's players made like the men or not? We aren't comparing men to women. You can tell by athletics, track and field records that because of the different physiologies, men tend to run faster than women. Women tend to have lower gravity as well because of the body shapes and the way they are. We've reflected all of that in the ratings, but to get 20 for pace or acceleration as a woman means we're comparing you to the fastest women in the world. Boom. That was a very good answer from Miles, honestly. Right, like, what that means is if you have a 20, you are right at the best of the world at that in the women's game. Makes total sense. It's an excellent explanation. The recent showcase event, he added, there have been a lot of difficult debates we've had on different things, such as how we deal with pregnancy and the menstrual cycle. Fair, dude. Totally fair. Did he say how they handled it? We don't have those things in the game because we wanted to keep it relatively simple for this year. But those are things that have to. Interesting. So no pregnancy, no periods. But this confirms that they want to add pregnancy to the game at some point. Bro, that's wild. They're actually going to, what he's saying is that they are going to try to cross that river. Assuming they continue on the same trajectory, they're going to try to cross that river. But it's not going to be in the game this year because they want to keep it simple, which I get. What if it's new gen only? That wouldn't surprise me at all. It would probably be new gen only that could get pregnant and do the period stuff, because if you do that with players that are real, it's the same, like, I don't know. Because they don't put bad personalities on real men's players in the game because they're worried about getting sued. But yeah, like if you had a real player and then all of a sudden they get pregnant in the game, would they be able to sue you for having that? Like, yeah. It's at least a little creepy, maybe. It could be, I guess. Whether those are for real players or generated players within the game, we need to talk to Bro, if I had just read one more line. We need to talk to lawyers about the way people are represented, but I'm also looking forward to a new army of people telling us what they want to see in the game. Okay, if I had literally just read one more line, he talks about it. Oh, cool. Jacobson also confirmed that hijabs for Muslim players will be in this year's game, where suited. Banger. Nice. Perhaps the biggest talking point is the new match engine, and this is talking about the motion captor. We win every Friday for 6 months. You turn up and you have a list of deliverables such as 100 headers, 100 left-footed passes, 100 right-footed passes. Then you eventually go into slide tackles where Rosie would leave a foot in, and then how you'd react to getting a red card or being subbed off. So just a lot of motion. That's all their motion captor stuff. What could the impact of including women's football be? I'm imagining this is going to be very grandiose takes here. Growing up, I would have never imagined playing Football Manager because it wasn't a space for us. Normalizing women's football in the game is exciting. I think that, like, the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway here is that the way they've chosen to do women's football and include it in the sport as just another part of the footballing ecosystem, just like any other league, is it's normalizing women's football. It's just normalizing women's football. In the same way that including women in Ultimate Team was another great move to just normalize women's football. For someone who's never been interested in women's football before and decides to manage a women's team, the amount of information and knowledge they'll learn about the players, teams, and leagues is exciting. I think we're about to engage a whole new audience, and I'm excited to see how this community will grow. Yeah, and I think it will, in the same way that knowledge of women's footballers went up a lot when they were included in Ultimate Team. I think you're going to see that sort of thing happen in the Football Manager community, where there's going to be, think about this. There are going to be wonder kids that are in the women's side of the game that become legendary. Like, there's going to be your Freddie Adu. There's going to be your, like, Odegaard was always one that I always used to think of. Like, these guys that became legendary because of their potential ability. There's going to be women's footballers that do the same thing and become the same memes on the women's side of the game. Maxime Sigalko, good example. Yusufa Mukoko, yes. As part of that growth, there's also self-awareness from Jacobson that he's not have all the answers in his first go-round, so with future games in mind, he asked for anyone who could help him and his staff further to get in touch. All right, this was definitely like kind of a PR puff piece for SI, but it provided some good information on the way they're thinking about stuff and the way they're approaching women in the game, which I'm going to give them really high marks for the way they're approaching women in the game, and I think it's only a good thing. It's the biggest single addition of like players and leagues we're getting in Football Manager in a very long time. And I think it's going to be really fun because the match engine is going to feel completely different. So it's going to feel like a new game in some senses that I think when people start playing in, it's going to feel very refreshing because we're going to be looking at pretty similar animations on the men's side because they didn't really take the time, it seems like, to overhaul that necessarily. So this is just a good spot to be in, dude. Yeah, and, like, you're never going to play Football Manager with the number one reason being the graphics. But the better the graphics are, the more people will play it, and the better the graphics are, the more immersive the game is going to be. I think the women's footage drop has exposed maybe the graphics are a little worse, but maybe on the women's side, like the lighting in this sort of clip's just not that great. But the whole new match engine and everything, all of that's fun. All of that is great. We've also added data for existing owners and new Gen 1s to reflect their likelihood of hiring. Wow, they've given people and owners and directors a likelihood of hiring across men's and women's football. That's like an unnecessary addition, but very, like, it isn't totally necessary for them to have done this, but is very cool. With more movement of coaches and managers between the men's and women's game, you'll experience more depth. But there are some people that will stay within women's football just because that's like their hidden attribute is they just stay in women's football and they just stay in men's football. And that's really cool. So I thought it was some other change to new generation. Yeah, I'll give women coming into Football Manager like a 9 out of 10. Like this announcement's a 9 out of 10. Because the only issue I have with it in a serious sense is the kind of graphics of it. And I don't remember having another issue with it. I don't know. Without international management, it can't. Okay, if there is no international management, women coming into Football Manager is literally a 4 out of 10. Assuming, because they haven't said that it's not in 26, right? If there is no international management, 4 out of 10. If there is, 9 out of 10. The graphics are really the issue for me. But I really like the idea that they have a bunch of new animations, that the match engine's going to feel different when you're playing the women's game. I think that's a huge W. I think that's like the number one place where they could have been tripped up. I like basically everything about the way they've decided to incorporate this, other than the like some of the graphic stuff that we saw. That was it. I think the league selection screen was on there. Oh my dude, you're right. Oh, one more beautiful revelation. So it is better. I mean, it's not super better, but it is better. This is what it looks like when you're building your database in Football Manager now. And it is an improvement. Different transfer modes. Yeah, that's like original real world. And remember how you have those options now. That's not anything new in the game. You have your game start date up at the top. You have your database up in the top right. So if you're going to mod anything, that's where you're going to click on it. You have women's leagues and men's leagues as two different boxes so you don't accidentally get them confused, which is something I didn't think about until right now, but that is smart, right? And you have your add nations in the top left. So there are 11 nations that they're going to have women's leagues from, which is nice. You got your preferences and your advanced settings off to the right, but you're not overwhelmed with those right at the beginning, so that is good. I think this is a significant improvement. It's not as good as the team selection screen, but it is way better than it was. I still think they should give you recommended setups, and it doesn't look like they offer that. They should give you, because the majority of people don't want to get into the setting weeds this much, they should give you a button that says, you know, where are you managing? Here's a recommended setup. And then maybe even a couple of options like, you know, do you want to play a long time? Well, then this is the recommended setup. Are you only playing a few years? Well, then this is the recommended setup. Do you really care about like continental competition? Well, then this is the recommended setup. They need to add that. You can make a video. Yeah, I have in the past, Marius, I think a couple of years ago. Don't they do that with Quick Start? I feel like nobody interacts with Quick Start. I like forgot it was in the game. So women's football is officially in Football Manager. We know what it's, you know, how it's going to work. We know what it's going to look like. And yeah, welcome to the future, I guess.